What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Clint from the Die Hard MMA Podcast. This is brought to you by PubSportsRadio.com, where we bring all the best sports betting and entertainment value to you for absolutely free. Best YouTube channel out there is today. This is the Total Takedown. We're going over UFC Vegas 26, and we are breaking down every single fight and looking at whether or not we think it's going to go under or over the total, rather than picking a side or a particular fighter to go ahead and win this thing. So let's dive straight on into this thing. Do me a real quick favor, hit that like button for me, and if you're on social media of any kind, share the video out there so more people get some eyes on it here. We're starting the night off with Damir Ismagulov taking on Rafael Alves. We've got a total here set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is minus 180. The under 2.5 is plus 158. Now, Rafael Alves is a guy who used to fight at 145, but he had an egregious weight miss. They've bumped him up to 155, and he's taking on the returning Ismagulov. Ismagulov is a grinder of epic proportions. All this guy does is pick his opponents apart over the course of 15 minutes. Rafael Alves is the exact opposite. He's a finisher. He's a big slugger. He's a guy with nasty submission offense, big tight squeeze, big power on the feet, explosive. It's what he does. The problem is Rafael Alves at 19-9 seems like when he's on the wrong end, when he's the nail rather than being the hammer, sometimes he can fold up and he ends up getting finished. Damir Ismagulov, like I said, this is a guy that is incredibly difficult to finish. 22-1 record. Always looking to the over, rarely finishes his opponents because he's more than happy to just coast away a 15-minute decision. So with this total, I've got to agree with this minus 180 on the over 2.5. The only question for me is Rafael Alves, because moving up to 155, it could help or it could hurt him in big ways, and that both helps the under at the same time. If he's better at 155, he's going to have more explosive power, more speed, more knockout ability. If he's damaged by going up to 155 because he's used to being the bully, he's used to having the size advantage, there's a potential he gets finished here. Damir Ismagulov is by far the more well-rounded, the better fighter overall in general, and he will have openings in this fight. So whether or not Rafael Alves can hang at 155 is the real question here. So there is some chance for that under 2.5 to hit at plus 155, plus 150, somewhere in that ballpark. And I don't mind taking a shot on a violence bet here in this spot. I just have questions about both guys. Damir Ismagulov coming back from this long layoff. We're not sure what he's going to look like. If he's added new wrinkles into his game, he could be deadly here on Saturday. Rafael Alves coming up to 155. We know this guy's explosive. We know this guy is dangerous. So he's got a puncher's chance better than most people would. So there's a chance this thing gets finished and it goes under, but not a total that I'm overly interested in playing. And I kind of have to, I just got to side with Damir Ismagulov doing what he does and getting this thing done by decision. Lightweight fight up next. Yancy Medeiros taking on Damir Hadzovic. What we've got is a total set at 2.5. The over is minus 145. The under is plus 125. It looks like there's some plus 110, plus 115s going around out there in the market. But Yancy Medeiros is a fantastic striker here at lightweight. He's a guy that's really trying to reinvent himself here. He's had some high-level competition in the UFC, and he has struggled when he faces high fight IQ, high-caliber opponents. Damir Hadzovic is a guy that has really struggled as well in the UFC. He's getting older. He's getting up there. He's kind of a middleman. He does everything well. He just does nothing amazing. He can tend to gas out and get tired later on in his fights, especially when it's a grappling-heavy game plan, and that's normally the spot where he has the advantage, especially in this fight. I think that's going to be kind of his path to victory. We are in the apex again. We're back in the small cage, so you'd expect Damir Hadzovic to be going for those takedowns, and it's up to Yancy Medeiros to defend those, keep it at range, and then work his striking. I think there's a half-decent chance. Both these guys have a tendency to get finished. Both these guys have a tendency to slow down as the fight goes on. It's kind of a sloppy lower-level heavyweight, or not heavyweight, sorry, lower-level fight, and because of that, you end up seeing a lot more finishes. I would be looking at this under. The plus 115, plus 125 on the under 2.5, that seems like a pretty sweet spot for me. Somebody going to sleep. I kind of lean on the Yancy Medeiros side. I think he lands something big, especially once Damir slows down, starts huffing and puffing in round 2, something like that. But if Medeiros isn't able to get off, if he isn't able to get going, and Damir gets him on the floor, this could be a ground and pound TKO. Both guys contributing to that under cashing. I wouldn't mind taking the shot, and that is a spot that I'm taking a look at, maybe throwing on a violence bet myself. Featherweight matchup here, Joshua Kulibao taking on Xiaonan. We've got a UFC debutante in Yilan Shah. Sorry, I keep messing up this guy's name because I still haven't heard my guy John Anik pronounce it. I'm not sure how it goes. Total here set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is minus 185. The under 2.5 is plus 160. This is a spot where we know next to nothing about Xiaonan. He's making his UFC debut. There's not a lot of tape out there on him. He's fought a really low level of competition. He's dropping down to featherweight for the first time. So huge question marks all the way around. This is my Friday spot. This is the fight that I want to read on Friday and see what Xiaonan looks like at 145, because if he's coming down to 145 and that improves him, if he looks great, if he looks like he has a solid weight cut, if he's well muscled, in shape, moves well, those are the types of things where I would think maybe his heavy grappling game plan could cause Joshua Kulibao some problems. However, if he comes down and he's even just a little bit off, then Joshua Kulibao is probably going to knock this guy out. Kulibao is a very talented striker. We've seen him fight UFC caliber competition at a very high level and do quite well doing that. And before he got to the UFC, he was taking people out left and right on the regional scene. I would kind of expect him to translate into that middle of the road type of fighter in the UFC, where if you're not quite there yet, he's gonna take you out. The only problem for me is I really only see Kulibao getting the finish here. If Xiaonan gets this thing done, it's probably through the grappling. It's probably because he's able to smother Kulibao, take him down right on top of him. I don't necessarily expect Kulibao to get submitted by Xiaonan, and so because of that, I have a hard time backing this under. I do think that Kulibao by knockout is probably the way this fight ends. That's the way that I would be looking to play it, but this is a spot where maybe you just take Kulibao inside the distance rather than playing this under, because I don't know that the other fighter can really contribute to it in any way except for having weakened durability. Now, if he does have that lesser durability, again, maybe just play Kulibao inside the distance or by knockout. So I'm going to say under 2.5, but it's not one that I'm actually betting because I'm not getting the value criteria that I need to pull that trigger. Next up, flyweight fight, Bruno Silva taking on Victor Rodriguez, and I said that last fight was going to be my watch for Friday spot. This is definitely my watch for Friday spot because Victor Rodriguez is also dropping a weight class. This is a guy that throughout the course of his 10-fight career has now dropped 2 weight classes. Not something that we see a whole lot. He's making his 125-pound debut. He's finally going to be the bigger, stronger guy. And I feel like there's been a bit of a market overcorrection to Bruno Silva because he was just fighting for his job his last fight out. Yes, he looked incredible. Yes, he reminded everybody, including myself, why he has a roster spot. He's very talented, good striker, strong grappler, good wrestling, nasty submission offense. Like, Bruno Silva really can do it all. He belongs in the UFC. But when he's fighting these bigger, stronger, more durable guys, he tends to struggle just a little bit. So Victor Rodriguez coming down a weight class could pose him some problems. The question is, will Victor Rodriguez take out Bruno Silva? More than likely not. This guy's incredibly durable. He's hard to put away. He's hard to finish. And honestly, I think this cut to 125 is going to hurt Victor more than it's going to help him. So I would be looking at Bruno Silva once again inside the distance. I know I said we're breaking these fights down from a totals perspective rather than from a side perspective. But some of these skewed one-sided fights, there's really no other way that you can look at it but just, I think this guy is going to get the finish. So I'm kind of leaning on Silva here to get the finish, but the total is set at 2.5. The over is plus 135. The under is minus 155. And I don't know that I want to lay that kind of chalk on an under 2.5 in a flyweight fight. I do think it goes under, but at the same time, I think there's much more value spots on this card. You can find better places to put your money than this under 2.5. Victor Rodriguez probably needs to get an early finish if he's gonna get a finish at all in this fight. Bruno Silva absolutely can Dagestani handcuff this guy and grind him out for 15 minutes if he wants to. So I don't think I'm interested in this under, even though I do think that that's the direction that it goes. Welterweight fight, Court McGee taking on Claudio Silva. This is a very interesting spot in my opinion. The total once again set at 2.5. The over is minus 175. The under is plus 155. And this is kind of a pick your fighter position. I've talked about these. There's always one every single card. Court McGee is a grinder. Court McGee is not a finisher. This is a guy that out-volumes his opponent. This is a guy that makes it hard for you to do really anything and just stays in your face and volumes you up. Claudio Silva is a guy that is really reliant on the finish. He's got big power on the feet. He's got a nasty BJJ submission game, world-class jiu-jitsu player on the mat. Really has to finish his opponents because on the feet, he's nothing special. Volume-wise, he's nothing special. And if he can't get you to the floor and just smother you, TKO you, or submit you on the ground, he gets extended. He has a bad gas tank as well. So it's going to be under for Claudio Silva and over for Court McGee. Those are really the only two ways that this thing plays out. If this thing goes a full 15 minutes, I have a really hard time seeing Claudio Silva get the nod on the judges' scorecard unless he drops Court McGee once per round for 2 rounds back to back. So he steals those even though Court McGee is out-voluming him on the feet. I'm kind of in the Court McGee camp here, so I would be looking at the over 2.5. I think that's the way the fight plays out. I think Court McGee's defense is really going to be the problem. We've seen him rocked a couple times. We've seen him hurt a couple times, but it's from much more high-caliber, high-level strikers that have been able to do that to him, not someone like Claudio Silva that's going to throw an overhand bomb from way outside that he sees coming 10 feet away and has time to react and dodge out of the way, especially with the way Court McGee can grind his solid submission defense. I don't see Claudio getting the finish, so I think this one's going over. I think minus 175 is a little bit too pricey, especially when you consider Claudio Silva is getting old and that bad gas tank may rear its ugly head. A round 3 finish for Court McGee is not out of the question in this fight, simply because Claudio may have nothing left to give after 10, 12 minutes of fighting here in this spot. So definitely not a total I have any interest in touching from a betting perspective, but I'm going to say over 2.5. Heavyweight fight, Big Ben Rothwell taking on Chris Barnett. My dad got a short notice replacement here. We got a total set at 2.5 rounds. We have an alternate of 1.5 that's kind of interesting to think about as well. Over 2.5 is plus 145. Under 2.5 is minus 165. And I gotta side with that under. I absolutely gotta side with that under. Chris Barnett is a big mountain of a man. Regularly weighs over 300 pounds, making his UFC debut. Short notice. I've seen some bad things from this man on the ground, and we know Ben Rothwell's got that high-level jiu-jitsu game. Ben Rothwell's going to have a huge size advantage, and honestly, you would think a power advantage as well. The only problem is Ben has been having a bit hard of a time pulling the trigger lately, and that makes me a little bit nervous for him. If Big Ben comes out here and he decides to go after this kid like he did Stefan Struve, he's going to finish the fight in about 2 minutes. So I expect an early finish, and I think Chris Barnett really has to do kind of the same thing. I don't think he can hang for 15 minutes with Big Ben Rothwell. I think if this fight drags on, Chris Barnett's just going to get grinded out. He's not going to be able to close the distance. He's not going to be able to get inside on Ben. And if he doesn't land something big and hard early, then he probably just gets grinded away and maybe even finished late. So I'm thinking Big Ben Rothwell is definitely the side here. And for the total under 2.5 minus 165, it's a bit chalky, but I definitely think that's the way that it goes. I'd be very surprised if this one made it to the judges' scorecards. The alternate at 1.5, though, that's where things get a little interesting for me. Heavyweight over 1.5s have a tendency of coming through. This one set at 1.5. Over is minus 140, under is plus 120. And I, again, would be a little bit interested in that under. I think these guys are going to be huffing and puffing if they can't get it done within a round and a half. I think this is a 1-round fight, and I don't think it goes much beyond that. You're getting a plus number for this thing to finish in round 1, and I think Barnett just isn't UFC level. I think Big Ben shows everybody that he isn't UFC caliber, or Chris Barnett plants his feet, blasts in, hits Big Ben with something huge, and drops him early and gets the finish himself. I don't see this fight going many other ways, because if Barnett has a big explosion early and doesn't get that finish, he's going to be a sitting duck, and I don't think that Ben is shot to the point where he won't take advantage of that. So I'm looking unders. Again, I don't know that I'm going to bet this one. I have a hard time betting any fight with Ben Rothwell because you just never know what you're going to get with the guy. He's so close to the end of his career at this point. Like I mentioned, that trouble pulling the trigger, that trouble finishing. I really don't want to trust this guy with my money. So I'm going to say double unders, but again, probably not one that I'm betting. Flyweight fight here for the final preliminary fight. Ricardo Ramos taking on Bill Algeo. And we've got Ricardo Ramos, who has definitely been known as a bit of a chinny fighter recently. Total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is minus 200. The under 2.5 is plus 170. I would not hate a flyer on this under getting that plus 170 price tag. Bill Algeo, I mean, both these guys are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. Both these guys know how to scramble. Both these guys can strike. Bill Algeo, super high volume, great gas tank. Ricardo Ramos, same thing. He's a high volume striker. We've seen him slow down, but that's only when he's been out-muscled and overpowered by stronger, more physical opponents. I think these guys are going to go to war. I don't really think there's much other option, because if they decide to get to the ground game, both these guys are scramble masters. They'll be able to fly all over each other. I don't think either guy is going to have much of a wrestling dominating type of performance. And on the feet, they're both extremely high volume, which is going to leave openings for both these guys to get clipped and hurt. Now, Ricardo Ramos, like I said, he's not been as durable as he used to be, so there's a chance for Bill Algeo to volume this guy, clip him, and put him down. And we've seen what Ramos has been able to do to other people. Bill Algeo's been nothing but durable so far in his UFC career, so that's kind of the only thing that I take away from this, is I don't want to get stuck on the side where Ricardo Ramos ends up being the better man and battering Bill Algeo, but he decides just never to fall. That could absolutely happen here in this spot. You take that chance if you play that under 2.5, but I'm going to say that there's enough firepower for one of these guys to get the finish. Again, this is a really tough card for me. I'm trying to keep it a little close to the vest, so I am not going to be betting this under 2.5, but that's the way I'd have to look at a big juicy number like plus 170. Heading on over to the main card, we've got the first fight of the night. Edmen Shahbazyan taking on Jack Hermansson. Total set at 1.5 for this one. Over 1.5 is minus 135. Under 1.5 is plus 115. And you've got all kinds of firepower on both sides of this fight. Jack Hermansson is a high volume striker, tries to come at his opponents, get in their face, and then force the wrestling, force the issue, get them to the ground, look for that back, look for that submission opportunity. He dives on legs, heel hooks. This guy's looking for any way to end the fight and end it early using that grappling. Edmen Shahbazyan, one of the best boxers in the UFC today, very young prospect. We saw him get battered, stepped up a little too early in class in his UFC career. Now he's got another opportunity. We've seen Jack Hermansson shell up. We've seen him get hurt by big power punchers before and just not really like it. So I think there's an opportunity for Shahbazyan to bounce back in a big way with an early KO victory. But at the same time, we've seen him have a bit of a struggle with the ground game, and if Jack Hermansson is able to get him on the mat, I expect Hermansson to be levels above where Shahbazyan is. I could absolutely see another heel hook or knee bar type of victory where Shahbazyan just isn't slick enough to escape this grappling wizard. So the under 1.5 is the way that I would look. Plus 115 doesn't sound half bad, but I do think Edmen Shahbazyan maybe comes out a bit more reserved this time. He came out hard his last fight against Derek Brunson. He was basically ready to walk over the older veteran. He's got to have a little more respect for this one. And if he takes his time, defends a couple takedowns, and forces Jack Hermansson into a striking matchup, I think the knockout comes to him. So it could be a later round 1 type of situation or a round 2 type of situation. I absolutely think that Edmen Shahbazyan maybe clips Hermansson and hurts him, but it could be right on that 1.5 mark. So another dangerous total in my opinion. But with the plus number, I got to take the side with the value and go under 2.5 at plus 110, because I do think somebody is going to end up going down in this one. Both guys, high stakes, really battling, jockeying for position at the top end of the division. So a win here is a big deal. Flyweight fight, David Dvořák taking on Raulian Paiva. David Dvořák is one of these hot prospects the UFC is looking to push. And the same thing with Paiva. Both guys have had a bit of a rough start here acclimating to the UFC. And it's going to be interesting to see which one of them is the real prospect. Total here set at 2.5. The over is minus 210. The under is plus 175. And this is a spot where I have a hard time, because how do you take an over when there is this much firepower on both sides of the cage? Now, neither of these guys is really known for getting finished, but both of them have been finished. Of the 3 losses that Dvořák has had, one of those was by knockout. Of the 3 losses that Paiva has had, one was by knockout. It was a doctor stoppage, it was a cut, and the other one was by submission. So, I mean, they have been finished. It's been a long time, and Dvořák hasn't been finished since all the way back in 2012. So no durability questions there. And Paiva, his finish was all the way back in 2015. So both much younger fighters when they actually did end up getting those finish losses. So I don't really want to bank on either of these guys going down. They're both tough. They're both grittable. They're both, durable and gritty. This is going to be a real tough matchup, but at the same time, they both are explosive. They both fire heat. I could see this being one of those fights that just continues to level up. Both these guys are looking to make a statement, look to plant themselves, cement themselves as the next big thing in the division, and because of that, we're getting a plus 175, where if we get into a pissing contest with two green fighters that just aren't quite at that elite level yet, somebody could get clipped with something big and go down. I would be leaning more towards the under on this one than the over, and not because of the durability problems for either guy, but because of the offense of either guy. So both guys can absolutely finish the other one. This one might sneak over, but I really wouldn't want to lay minus 200. There's going to be a couple of people that are clutching at their pearls if they took that over 2.5 at minus 200, because these guys are coming for a war on Saturday. Women's featherweight fight, Felicia Spencer taking on Norma Dumont. And what we've got here is a total set at 2.5, the over minus 165, the under plus 145. We've talked about how we get value with the women's fighters sometimes. We've talked about how there are opportunities to get big, juicy plus numbers on the women's fights because of how things are lining up. And Felicia Spencer, she's got a nasty submission game. If she gets Norma Dumont down on the ground, this thing could be over, and it could be over in a hurry. The problem is we haven't seen a whole lot of tape for Norma Dumont. We haven't seen a whole lot of evidence for what Norma Dumont is capable of on the mat. She is a judo black belt, so she's not opposed to the ground game, and we obviously know that she has been around that world. You don't get to that black belt level without having spent some time training arm bars and such on the mat with judo. So she's going to be defensively solid, and that's kind of the one thing that worries me. Felicia Spencer took an absolute beating from the GOAT, Amanda Nunes, so expecting someone like Norma Dumont to come in here and finish her, I just don't see it happening. Felicia Spencer is a tank. She's a brick wall. So if Norma Dumont wins, it's going to be by decision. If Felicia Spencer wins, it could be by submission or by decision, but because of that, we're really only getting one fighter contributing to this under, so I don't like this plus 145. I kind of feel like Felicia Spencer is the side here. I feel like Felicia Spencer by submission is really the way that you could potentially look at this one, but like I said, it doesn't meet my criteria, so from a side perspective, I would have to look towards that over. I don't like the minus 165, the minus 180 price tag on the over 2.5, but I can absolutely see that being the way this thing goes. In the small cage, if Spencer can't quite get a dominant enough position on the ground, maybe she grinds Norma Dumont for 15 minutes and has that kind of a decision win, but can't sync up a big flashy submission, can't find her way to the back, can't get under the neck. I could see her dominating on the floor and then just not quite being able to finish. I could see her pressing Dumont against the cage and grinding her out and not quite getting the finish. I could see Norma Dumont being the better striker. If she's able to defend a couple of takedowns and then turn the tables and beat on Felicia Spencer a little bit, Spencer ain't falling. So I could see this thing going over very, very easily. Over 2.5 is going to be the prediction here, even though I kind of like the Felicia Spencer side. Heavyweight fight, Justin Tafa taking on Jared Vanderaa. We've got Jared Vanderaa as a decent-sized underdog. All the love coming in recently on Jared Vanderaa to close that line back down. Total here set at 1.5. The over is minus 115. The under is minus 105. And we've talked about these greasy heavyweight 1.5s before. I think Justin Tafa is a guy that's shown he's relatively durable in the UFC. I don't think he's going away quickly or anytime soon. Vanderaa is a guy that can be finished, who can be hurt, but if he gets that grappling game going, you could be in trouble on the other side of that thing. He's got submission offense, he's got ground and pound offense, and it really just depends on whether or not Vanderaa is going to be a guy that fills out at the UFC level. Is he going to round out? Is he going to level up? Because Tafa is a guy that everyone expects to get to the UFC level, even if he's not quite there yet skill-wise. He's got the power, and that really makes all the difference. Justin Tafa could put Vanderaa down and put him down hard in the first round, but if Jared Vanderaa gets that grappling going, I think Tafa will be durable enough and savvy enough to kind of make it hard on him, defend, get to the cage, try to get back to his feet. We might be able to squeeze over that 1.5, but these are low-level heavyweights, folks, and decent mid-tier heavyweights are the ones that I really would more be looking towards that over for. These heavyweights are not the ones. These are the heavyweights that I fully expect to go under because somebody finds the hole in their opponent's game. So I'm tempted on that over 1.5 because it just has a tendency of going ahead and coming through, and especially if these guys get tired, they will lay on each other. they will run out of steam to be able to get that finish. They will have to slow the pace of the fight down, heave for breath, catching each other up against the cage, just pausing for a minute or so, kind of a truce situation while both guys take a couple deep breaths. That can definitely happen here in this spot. So I would say over 1.5, another one that I don't think I'm ballsy enough to put my money on. Co-main event here, Carla Esparza taking on Xiaonan. Total set at 2.5. Over is -400. Under is +325. We don't need to spend a ton of time on this one. This may be your lock of the evening, and we don't use the L word here on the Die Hard MMA podcast. -400 is a big price tag, but neither of these women finish. Carla Esparza, even though her face swells, even though she's got all that scar tissue, she's durable. She never gives up. It takes a heck of a lot of punishment to actually put her down. She's a decision machine. She forces the grappling. She's a pure wrestler. She doesn't do a whole lot once she gets positioned. Xiaonan is a fighter who's 13-1, heavy touted prospect. Everyone's looking forward to big things from her. She's working out at Team Alpha Male, so there's a chance her wrestling has improved. And if she gets taken down, which we've seen her get taken down in the UFC before, she's got a good get-up game. She keeps working. She's got a high-volume striking. She keeps a good pace, but she doesn't really sit on her punches. She doesn't have big power, so she relies on outscoring her opponents on the feet to get the win. So I'm fully expecting a very close fight. I'm expecting a split decision kind of situation, and that over 2.5 is basically free money on the night if you want to pony up and lay that -400, because there's just almost no finishing capability for either of these women here in this fight. Main event time, Cody Garbrandt taking on Rob Font. These guys are basically mirrors of one another. We've got two high caliber strikers, heavy hands, poppy punches, fast hands. These guys are incredible strikers, and it's going to be really fun to watch them go to war. Cody Garbrandt, the guy that can get a little heated, a little emotional there in the cage and really just drop the guard and slug away and see who drops first. Everyone's talked about him having a glass chin, but he's only been knocked out by two guys with some of the best knockout power in the division. Rob Font, he's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage. Very defensive striker, very solid. He outlands his opponents by a big margin because he minds his P's and Q's. So because of that, we've got a spot where you've got a power finisher and then a guy who does end up tending to get the finish, but because he lets it come to him. So one more a little bit chess player, the other one a bit more raw athleticism and power. Total here set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is +110. The under 2.5 is -130. And I would be tempted on the over here, folks. I really would. So Cody Garbrandt is a guy that seems to have kind of turned a corner in his career. He's a guy that, even though he knocks down a lot of his opponents and hurts a lot of people, he had that big comeback win his last time out against the Sun Sao. Everything was going to plan in that fight until he did something really crazy and caught a Sun Sao off guard. That's the kind of move that's not going to work on a Rob Font. That's the kind of move that Rob Font will stay clear of and stay out of distance on. And Rob Font is a guy that will take his time. Rob Font is a guy that will let that knockout emerge. It will let it come to him. So I think we've got a much more talented chess match than people would expect. I think Cody Garbrandt, even though it's hard for a fighter to really change their stripes this late in the game, he's capable of it, and he's a decent wrestler. We might see him try to implement some of a ground game. We've seen Rob Font get taken down before, and that's a wrinkle of Cody Garbrandt's game we haven't seen in a long time. If Cody Garbrandt focuses on his footwork, if he focuses on his movement, we could absolutely see a chess match on the feet here. So I would be looking at that over 2.5 and see this thing really get into the championship rounds before somebody gets clipped and put down. The over 3.5 at +165 is extremely tempting, and then the over 4.5 at +205. I've talked about it before, folks. There have been several times where I've said you play the overs, you take a dangerous fight that everyone is expecting to finish in the first round, you go over when you get to that high level and you cash all those plus money tickets. I've called it before and not had the cojones to actually pull the trigger on it, and this is one of those ones that's kind of calling me there. You could lay the juice on the over 1.5, the -165, get the plus money on the over 2.5, get the plus money on the over 3.5. That's where it gets dicey, because I don't know that this fight gets to the judges' scorecards. I think somebody is going to get clipped, somebody is going to get hurt before it gets to that point. And even if, no matter who it ends up being, I do think eventually somebody is going to get hit with a big power shot that they just can't quite handle and go down. So I don't know if I'd play the over 4.5 and the decision prop, especially when you've got, Cody Garbrandt undefeated, but his only losses have come by knockout. Rob Font's a guy, though, he's never been knocked out. Obviously, he hasn't fought this caliber caliber of opponent before, but he did go full 15 minutes with John Lineker, so we know he can be on the wrong side of taking some heat and then still pull it out. But he did fight guys like Rafael Assunção, Sergio Pettis, Pedro Munoz. He got submitted by Munoz, but Sergio Pettis and Rafael Assunção, those were chess matches. Those were fights that he took deep. Those were fights that had a chance to go longer. And we've seen in some interviews Cody Garbrandt talking about getting back to championship level Cody Garbrandt, right? He's talked about his fight with Dominic Cruz, the use of the footwork that enabled him to go a full 25 minutes and outclass Dom on the feet, the guy that nobody thought could be outclassed and outmoved. That's what he's talking about doing in this fight, getting back to being that guy. And don't even forget the last fight, the Rafael Assunção fight. It was at the 4-minute and 59-second mark of the second round. They were headed to round 3, and everything was looking very, very clearly going to the judges' scorecards in that fight until he pulled that weird duck and overhand move that caught Rafael Assunção off guard. Had it not been for that crazy wild punch, that fight is going over as well. I think Cody Garbrandt is a little bit more over-biased here later in his career after getting knocked out than he was previously, and if he does land a big bomb, I would be relying on the durability of Rob Font to absorb that shot and stay in the fight. So I'm tempted. I'm extremely tempted to do my overs and see how deep we could get this thing. Maybe you do a lay the chalk on the 1.5, a regular unit on the 2.5, and then cut it down to half units for the 3 and 4.5. So, if it does get to round 3, if it does get to round 4, you cash the big ones, and then you're kind of free rolling on the little ones for a little sprinkle extra juice on top. We'll see if I've got the guts to pull the trigger. So far, when I do this move or when I talk about this move, I'm like 3-1. I'm 3-1 on the calls, but I'm 0-0 because I've never actually had the cojones to pull the trigger and follow through with the bet because, like I said, it's terrifying. You pick these fights that should go under, that the conventional logic says is going to go under, and you have to go against that grain. So it makes it really tough to put your money and load up on those spots because even myself sitting here, my brain is telling me that it goes under, and you have to kind of look for the opportunities for it not to do that. That's the total takedown, folks. We've got some decent stuff this week. It's a very sketchy card. There's some tough fights to call, so be careful. This is a minefield. Keep it close this week, and I kind of like that main event spot. We'll see what happens. Give me a follow at Die Hard MMA Pod on Twitter. I tweet all of my official picks and bets right there, so you'll know what I end up actually pulling the trigger on. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite total for this week is, and of course, subscribe here to Pub Sports Radio. Good luck this week. Let's roll.